A black honors student saves his teacher's life during class, only to be accused of unauthorized presence in the room he was reassigned to the day before. The school never says his name, never thanks him. Instead, they call Child Protective Services on his mother. But what no one expected was who leaked the security footage. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The only reason Jamari Watson stepped into room 213 on that Tuesday morning was because he had been kicked out of room 104 the day before. At 17, Jamari wasn't the kind of student teachers worried about. He didn't roam the halls. He didn't interrupt class. He didn't talk unless spoken to. He wore his uniform clean and neat every day. His notebooks were color-coded, his handwriting perfect. But none of that ever seemed to matter. Jamari was a quiet kid, with sharp eyes and a sharper mind. He could break down algebraic proofs before most of his classmates even opened their books. He was the kind of student who read 2 chapters ahead in the textbook, not for extra credit, but because he wanted to understand. But still, at Stonebridge High, a predominantly white school in suburban Missouri, he felt the weight of being that black kid in every classroom. There was an unwritten rule he had learned over the years. Be smart but not too confident. Be polite, but never too direct. Be present but invisible enough not to scare them. He mastered those rules, wore them like second skin, until he met Mr. Foley. Mr. Thomas Foley, a 40-something social studies teacher, with a crew cut and a smug sense of authority, claimed to encourage open discussion. But what that usually meant was allowing white students to dominate the conversation, while penalizing black students for speaking too plainly. Jamari knew how to stay under his radar, until that Monday. The class discussion had veered into a conversation about civil disobedience. Someone brought up Colin Kaepernick. Another mentioned Black Lives Matter protests. A white student named Dylan scoffed, "But cops only kill people who break the law, right?" Jamari didn't plan to say anything. But the silence in the room felt like a noose tightening around his neck. So he cleared his throat and said calmly, "Sometimes the law protects injustice. Just because it's legal doesn't mean it's right." The room went quiet. Foley's eyes narrowed. "Are you suggesting the police are unjust by nature, Mr. Watson?" Foley asked, voice cold. "I'm suggesting the law isn't always applied equally," Jamari answered, carefully. "And history proves that." There was no shouting, no profanity, just calm, reasoned words. But Foley marked that moment. The next day, Jamari was pulled aside by the vice principal and told that his tone had been disruptive and borderline confrontational. He was being reassigned to another class temporarily, while the incident was reviewed. No hearing, no discussion. Just an administrative decision. Just like that. And so on Tuesday morning, Jamari found himself standing outside room 213. Mrs. Langston's room. The irony didn't hit him yet. That would come later. Mrs. Carol Langston was known as a no-nonsense teacher who didn't tolerate lateness, backtalk, or excuses. Her classroom was ice cold, not just from the overworked air conditioner, but from her presence. Desks were arranged in perfect rows. The walls were bare. Even the lights felt dimmer. Jamari stepped inside and introduced himself quietly. "I was reassigned here. I'm Jamari Watson." Mrs. Langston didn't look up from her gradebook. "You can take that empty seat in the back." Her voice was clipped. Her tone made it clear. She didn't care why he was there, and she didn't want to. The other students glanced at him, some curious, some cautious. No one smiled. Jamari took his seat and opened his notebook. Over the next few days, the tension grew like a storm cloud. Mrs. Langston rarely called on him, and when she did, it was with visible reluctance. If he got a question right, she barely nodded. If he answered slowly, she raised an eyebrow like he was wasting time. He noticed how she softened her voice when addressing white students, but clipped it sharp when she spoke to him. He noticed how she never made eye contact for more than a second. He noticed how he was the only one she checked twice for having a phone out, even though it was always face down on his desk. He said nothing, just took notes and did the work. But she noticed his presence, and it unsettled her, because Jamari didn't act like the stereotype. He didn't fumble. He didn't shrink. He was calm, precise, and unbothered. And something about that made Mrs. Langston uneasy, in a way she couldn't admit to herself. By Thursday, the silence between them was louder than any confrontation. And then came Friday. The class started like any other. Mrs. Langston handed out pop quizzes. Jamari finished early, placed his pencil down, and waited. He noticed her hand tremble slightly as she walked past his desk. He noticed her breathing was heavier than usual. And then he saw her stumble. It happened fast, so fast it barely made sense. 1 second she was walking toward the board. The next she collapsed, hard on the linoleum floor. Papers flew from her hand. A low, raspy, choking sound escaped her throat. The room froze. Students gasped. Some stood. No one moved.
No one except Jamari.
And he wasn't even supposed to be there. But by the end of the week, Mrs. Langston would be on the ground, gasping for breath, and Jamari would be the only one who knew what to do. She didn't even know his name, until he saved hers. The sirens hadn't arrived yet. The classroom was chaos. Students shouting, phones out, desks screeching across the floor. But through the noise, Mrs. Carol Langston could hear a single voice, low and calm, cutting through the panic. Call 911. Now. Tell them she's not breathing. It wasn't authority, it was instinct. As consciousness faded in waves, Mrs. Langston's last memory before everything went dark was the face of a boy kneeling beside her, the one she'd never really looked at before. And in that flickering moment, a strange shame clawed at her chest, one she couldn't name. Because she knew him, but not really. He had been there for almost a week, and she still couldn't remember his name. 3 days earlier, on Jamari's first morning in her class, Mrs. Langston had walked into the building late. She was carrying too many papers, too many burdens, and an invisible weight of assumptions she had carried her entire life. To her, the world was neatly divided between order and chaos, students who followed rules and those who didn't. She prided herself on control. Her classroom, her lessons, her image. For 22 years she had taught history at Senbridge High, and in that time she'd convinced herself that discipline meant fairness, and discomfort meant disrespect. She didn't hate her black students. She told herself. She just expected more from them. She wasn't racist, she believed. She was consistent. But consistency for Mrs. Langston meant refusing to see how differently she treated the same behavior depending on the skin it came from. There had been moments over the years that chipped at that lie. Small, quiet things she ignored. The time she clutched her purse tighter when a tall black student passed her in the parking lot after dark. The way her voice always got sharper when she called attendance on a row with Jamal, or DeAndre or Kiara in it. The way she always said, "You people need to focus," without realizing who you people meant. She would have denied any of it if asked. She saw herself as fair, as principled, firm but kind. Her words during staff evaluations. But deep down, buried under layers of experience and excuses, was fear. It wasn't hatred. It was fear disguised as professionalism. When Jamari first walked into her room that Tuesday, she noticed everything, except what mattered. The even tone in his voice. The quiet respect in his posture. The careful way he moved. Instead, she saw his skin, his tall frame, his unreadable face, and her mind filled in the rest. Another one of Folly's transfers. Probably disruptive. Let's just keep things strict from the start. Take the seat in the back, she'd said without looking up. When he nodded and obeyed, she took it as aloofness. When he stayed quiet, she took it as disengagement. When he smiled faintly, she thought it was attitude. She didn't realize he was just trying to stay safe. In her mind, Jamari was a challenge she hadn't asked for. A student who would test her patience, make her adjust her flow, disrupt her balance. She noticed his silence, not his work ethic. She noticed his stillness, not his focus. In class, she rarely called on him. When he did raise his hand, she found herself scanning for anyone else first, subconsciously avoiding him. And when she finally called on him and he answered perfectly, her instinct wasn't praise, it was disbelief. "How did you know that?" she'd asked one day after he quoted a passage from the Federalist Papers almost word for word. He looked confused by the question. "I read ahead," he said simply. But the way he said it, matter of fact, not humble, rubbed her wrong. She mistook quiet confidence for arrogance. She mistook composure for defiance. And that, more than anything, was her curse. At home, Mrs. Langston lived alone. Her husband had passed 5 years earlier, leaving behind a tidy pension and a silence that filled the walls of her small brick house. She filled that silence with grading, lesson plans, and cable news, the kind of programs that confirmed her beliefs about what's wrong with the world. The kind that fed her fear while pretending to offer understanding. She watched stories about youth crime in urban schools and shook her head, muttering to herself, "Parents just don't teach respect anymore." She didn't realize she was talking about kids who looked like Jamari. She didn't realize she had stopped seeing individuals and started seeing patterns. Her classroom had become her fortress, one where order mattered more than empathy. She believed that control kept her safe. But control has a way of crumbling under truth. By Thursday, she'd begun to notice Jamari more. Not in admiration, but in confusion. His test scores were impeccable. His assignments, meticulous. Yet he never raised his hand, never joked, never tried to please her. Most students, she thought, were eager to earn her approval. Jamari seemed indifferent to it. When she called on him for a question about Reconstruction, he answered in detail, connecting it to economic policy and systemic exclusion. It was brilliant, but she didn't say that. Instead, she said, "Next time, keep your answer shorter. We don't have all day." She saw him nod quietly, jot something in his notebook. He didn't look hurt, but something in his calm unsettled her. She couldn't place it then, but she later realized it was dignity. Dignity she hadn't expected, and didn't know how to handle. That night she found herself thinking about him while washing dishes. The way he'd looked at her when she cut him off. Not angry, just distant. She tried to shake it off, convincing herself he was being cold or dismissive. But part of her knew he'd done nothing wrong. Still, the next morning her tone with him was colder, sharper. She gave him harder looks, shorter instructions, smaller patience. She didn't know why. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was the unsettling reflection he forced on her without saying a word. And Jamari felt it all. Every glance, every clipped phrase, every invisible wall. But he said nothing. He just kept doing the work. Friday came like any other routine. Predictable, controlled. The students filed in, buzzing about the weekend. Mrs. Langston had planned a review session and a surprise quiz. She liked her routines tight, her lessons structured to the minute. Jamari came in early, as always, sat in the back, as always, took out his notebook and pencil, ready before the bell. But that morning, he noticed something different. Mrs. Langston looked pale. Her hands shook as she handed out papers. There was sweat beading on her forehead, despite the air conditioning. He hesitated, then spoke softly. "Ma'am, are you okay?" She blinked, startled. No one had asked her that in months. "I'm fine," she snapped quickly, brushing it off. "Get started on your quiz." He nodded, silently returning to his work. But he kept glancing up, watching her pace the room, her breathing uneven. As the minutes ticked by, her words started to slur. She stopped mid-sentence more than once, rubbing her chest. Jamari noticed. He raised his hand, quietly. "Ma'am." She waved him off. "Finish your paper." But then she stumbled. Her pen clattered to the floor. Her face twisted in confusion, as if her own body had betrayed her. Then she dropped. The class froze. Gasps, screams, a desk tipping over. For a second, no one moved. No one except Jamari. He jumped up from his seat, heart pounding but hands steady. He moved toward her while the rest backed away. "Somebody call 911, he said, voice clear and firm. He knelt beside her, checked her pulse, then tilted her head back like he'd been taught at a CPR workshop months ago. Her lips were turning blue. He started chest compressions, counting quietly under his breath. 1, 2, 3, 4. A few students were crying. Some were filming. Others stood in shock. Mrs. Langston, slipping in and out of consciousness, could faintly hear his voice, a voice she'd misread, dismissed, and avoided. And for the first time she felt something she never expected from him. Compassion. He wasn't supposed to be there. But he was. And he was saving her life. Until the day she collapsed at her desk, and every student froze except Jamari. When everyone else hesitated, he ran toward danger for someone who'd never looked at him like a human. Time didn't slow down. That was a lie people told themselves to make chaos sound poetic. For Jamari Watson, everything happened too fast, too loud, too real. Mrs. Langston collapsed like a stringless marionette, her body folding inward as if gravity had been waiting its turn. Her hand flinched once, twice, and then stilled. The quiz she'd been holding fluttered across the cold linoleum floor like a discarded flag. A thud echoed against the silence, and then came the screams. It took only seconds for the room to unravel. "Miss Langston? Oh my God, somebody get help." Chairs scraped the floor. One girl dropped her phone. A boy in the front row stood up and backed away like the body might leap toward him. No one got close. No one touched her. No one except Jamari. His legs moved before he even thought. He pushed past the shocked cluster of students and knelt beside her trembling frame. The pale of her lips was unmistakable now, bluish, rimmed in fear. She was gasping, but barely. He checked her pulse, too faint, almost gone. Her eyes fluttered once, then rolled back. He had seen this before. Not in real life, but in the rec room of the Midtown Youth Center during a free CPR certification class his mother had signed him up for last summer. He remembered the feel of the practice dummy. The instructor's voice. Do not wait for permission to save someone's life. He tilted her head back gently, listening for breath. None. Her chest wasn't moving. I think she's having a heart attack, someone yelled from behind. Jamari didn't respond. His focus narrowed to his hands, her body, and the seconds slipping past like sand through glass. Hey, he barked without looking up. Call 911 and tell them she's unconscious. No pulse. The class froze. Someone finally reached for their phone. Others stood against the wall, filming, whispering, paralyzed. But not Jamari. He clasped his hands together and began compressions, counting in his head just like he'd practiced. 30 pushes, then breathe. 30 more. Steady rhythm. Push deep, push hard. He could feel the pressure building behind him, but he blocked it out. His palms were sweaty. His arms burned. His heart raced, but his expression didn't waver. He counted, focused, worked. This woman who never even asked his name, who looked at him like a storm she had to weather. He was now her last hope. 1, 2, 3. A minute passed. Then another. Her chest jerked slightly. Was that a gasp? He kept going. From the doorway, an assistant principal appeared, stunned, frozen in place. More students had gathered. A small crowd. Phones everywhere. A few gasped. A few cried. Back up! Jamari shouted. She needs space to breathe. For the first time that week, his voice filled the room. Sirens wailed outside. Then footsteps thundered down the hall. 2 paramedics rushed in with a stretcher and gear. One of them slid beside Jamari and tapped his shoulder. You started compressions? The medic asked. Jamari nodded, stepping back. You might have saved her life, kid. The second paramedic administered oxygen. The first attached electrodes and prepped the defibrillator. The room became a blur of shouts, suction noises, and blinking lights. Jamari stood in the corner now, hands shaking, sweat soaked through his collar. His classmates stared at him, some wide-eyed, others still recording. No one said a word to him. Not a thank you, not a how did you know what to do. Just silence. Minutes later, the stretcher rolled out of the classroom. Mrs. Langston's face was still pale, but her chest rose steadily now. The paramedic who'd spoken to Jamari gave him a nod of respect as they passed. Then, it was over. The assistant principal turned to the class. Everyone, will be dismissing you early. Administration will follow up with your parents. Students began to shuffle out, but no one spoke to Jamari. He sat in his seat, hands still trembling slightly. He expected someone, anyone, to say something, to recognize what he'd done, to offer a nod, a pat on the back, even a glance of appreciation. Nothing came. Even as they walked past him, students kept their distance. Son whispered. One girl looked at him with something close to fear. By the time he got home, the story had already twisted. His mother, Tamika, was waiting at the door, her face caught between pride and confusion. Her phone buzzed nonstop. Baby, they called me from the school. Said there was a medical emergency in your class. Are you okay? Jamari nodded slowly. She collapsed. I helped until the EMTs came. Tamika stared at him. You did CPR? Yeah. From the youth center class, remember? Her hand covered her mouth. She pulled him into a hug. You saved her, Jamari. You saved that woman. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt hollow, like something had broken open and spilled. He went to his room to lie down. The image of Mrs. Langston's lifeless body burned into his mind. The way her breathing returned, shallow but real. The nod from the paramedic. The eyes of his classmates, watching, but not seeing him. The next morning, the announcement came over the intercom, but it wasn't what anyone expected. This message is regarding the incident in room 2113. We'd like to commend the fast response of our staff and emergency personnel. The teacher involved is now in stable condition. We are investigating the presence of an unassigned student in that class at the time of the incident. Jamari's ears rang. Unassigned student? No name. No credit. Just suspicion. Tamika called the school immediately. The receptionist transferred her twice, then told her someone would get back to her. By lunch, a version of the school's statement was already circulating among parents. A screenshot landed on Twitter. Due to an emergency in room 213, protocol was followed. We are reviewing student presence during that period, as one individual had not been previously scheduled in that room. The comments exploded. What do they mean, one individual? Are they blaming a student for helping? Is this about the black kid I saw in the video? The footage had surfaced, taken from someone's phone. It showed Jamari performing CPR while other students panicked. It was shaky but clear. The caption, "This boy saved our teacher's life." Why is the school acting like he wasn't supposed to be there? The clip hit 100,000 views by evening. People were angry, but also confused, because instead of celebrating Jamari, the school had begun an internal investigation, not into safety, not into protocol, but into why he was in that classroom to begin with. Tamika received a call that night from someone in the district office. She put the phone on speaker. "Mrs. Watson, we're not saying your son did anything wrong, but he wasn't scheduled for that class. We just want to understand why he was there." Tamika's voice cracked. "Because he was removed from his other class for no reason. That's why. You put him there." A pause. "Ma'am, we'd appreciate it if you didn't speak to the press just yet. Let us conclude our internal review." She hung up. Jamari sat at the edge of the couch, stunned. It didn't matter what he'd done. To them, he was still just a question mark. A possible problem. A disruption to the narrative they wanted to control. He had saved her life. But now, it was his character under review. But instead of applause, the school issued a disturbing statement that would flip the narrative. The school didn't call him a hero. They called him present, without authorization. By the time Jamari woke up Saturday morning, the storm had already begun. His phone buzzed on his nightstand, text, notifications, missed calls. He blinked at the light from the screen, half awake, and saw the first message from a classmate. They released a statement. "You need to see this." He sat up, thumb trembling slightly, as he opened the link. It was a screenshot from the Stonebridge High School official email. Subject: update on classroom medical emergency. Yesterday, an incident occurred involving a faculty medical emergency during class instruction. The rapid response of emergency personnel ensured the staff member received immediate care and is now in stable condition. We are currently reviewing safety procedures due to the presence of an unassigned student in the classroom at the time of the incident. No further details will be provided until this internal matter is resolved. Principal Karen Stroud, Stonebridge High Administration. That was it. No name, no recognition. No mention that he had performed CPR. Just the phrase that burned itself into his chest. Presence of an unassigned student. He read it 3 times before it sank in. The way the sentence framed him not as a savior, but as a trespasser, as a problem, as an anomaly that needed to be reviewed. He'd saved a woman's life, and the only thing the school wanted to investigate was why he was there. Downstairs, his mother Tamika was already pacing the kitchen, holding her phone like a weapon. Her nurse's scrubs were still on from her overnight shift, but her eyes were blazing with exhaustion and fury. "Jamari," she said sharply, waving her phone. "You seen this mess?" He nodded silently. "I'm calling them," she said. "Right now." He reached for her wrist gently. "Ma, don't. It's just gonna make things worse." She stared at him like she didn't recognize the calm in his voice. "Make things worse? They calling my son an unauthorized what? Boy, you saved that woman's life." He looked away. "They don't see it like that." Tamika slammed the phone down on the counter. "Well, they about to." She started typing furiously into her Facebook app. Jamari didn't stop her this time. Maybe she needed to let it out. Within minutes, she posted a screenshot of the school's email with a caption that read, "My son Jamari Watson performed CPR on his teacher after she collapsed in class and saved her life." Instead of thanking him, Stonebridge High calls him an unassigned student. How many ways can you say racism without saying the word? She hit post. The comment section exploded almost immediately. Parents, students, and neighbors began tagging local news outlets, community leaders, anyone who might listen. Within an hour, screenshots of her post spread through the town and beyond it. By noon, Stonebridge High was trending locally, on Twitter. A new hashtag emerged. And say his name. Jamari Watson. Tweets poured in. Lauren reads. So a black kid saves his teacher's life and the school acts like he broke in. Disgusting. Justice for all. This is how systemic racism works. Language erases the hero. They called him unassigned. Say his name. Jamari Watson.
Hey Coach D.
My son goes to Stonebridge. That boy is one of the good ones. Quiet, respectful, always helps others. How dare they? By 3 p.m., a local news van was parked outside the school gates. The principal's phone line was flooded. The district's PR office scrambled to draft clarifying statements. The superintendent ordered an internal communications lockdown. But the damage was already done. The story had escaped their control. That evening, Channel 7 aired a segment titled, Hero Student or Unauthorized Presence. Missouri Teen's Life-Saving Act Sparks Debate. The anchor's voice carried that careful neutrality that disguised judgment. The district has not confirmed the identity of the student involved, citing privacy laws. However, social media posts identify him as 17-year-old Jamari Watson, a junior at Stonebridge High. Sources close to the family claim that Jamari administered CPR to a teacher who suffered cardiac arrest. The school's response has raised questions about racial bias and institutional language. Then came a shaky cell phone video from the classroom, the same one that had been circulating online. It showed Mrs. Langston on the floor, students panicking, and Jamari's steady hands pressing against her chest in rhythmic compressions. The footage was silent, except for muffled cries. But what people saw spoke volumes. A young black boy saving a white woman's life and being treated like a suspect. By Sunday morning, the story had become national. Cable hosts debated it. Op-eds appeared online overnight. One commentator on a conservative outlet said, maybe the school was just following procedure. Let's not jump to racism. But on community radio, the host had a different take. When a white student helps, they're a hero. When a black student helps, they're a security concern. That's not protocol, that's prejudice. Outside the Watsons' modest brick house, reporters began gathering. Microphones, cameras, the hum of live coverage. Tamika opened the door once, to a young black journalist from the St. Louis Observer. He asked softly, can you tell us what your son was thinking when he stepped forward that day? Tamika looked at her son across the room. Jamari sat on the couch, head low, earbuds dangling from his lap. He looked tired. Thinking? She said slowly. He was thinking about saving a life. That's all. Meanwhile, inside the halls of Stonebridge High, panic spread among staff. Teachers whispered about the video, about the statement, about the fallout. Some defended the principal, said she was just following policy. Others quietly admitted it felt wrong. They knew Jamari. They knew his record. His silence wasn't defiance. It was grace. One teacher murmured to another in the lounge. They should have just said thank you. That boy deserves a medal. But the administration doubled down. A second email went out Monday morning. Subject statement clarification regarding Friday's incident. We appreciate community concern. However, misinformation has spread online. We remind everyone that district safety protocols must be followed at all times, including classroom assignments. We ask for respect and patience as we conduct our internal review. Principal Karen Stroud. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just more bureaucratic ice. The backlash grew sharper. Community leaders began organizing a rally. The local NAACP chapter released a statement condemning the district's language and calling for a public apology. Students of color started wearing homemade pins that said unassigned, unapologetic. The next day, someone spray painted across the school's back wall. He saved her life. Maintenance covered it before dawn. But not everyone supported Jamari. In Facebook parent groups, comments turned ugly. He shouldn't have been in that classroom. We don't know the full story. Bet he was just showing off for attention. Even some parents at church pulled Tamika aside. You don't want this kind of attention, one whispered. You can't win against the system. Tamika didn't respond. She just smiled tightly and walked away. But inside she was boiling. Her son had done everything right. Everything. And somehow still ended up the villain. That night, Jamari sat by his window, watching reporters pack up their gear. The glow of their vans blinked like false stars in the driveway. He felt hollow again. He had saved a life. But instead of being celebrated, he had become a story, a headline, a debate topic, a symbol. No one had asked how he felt. Not one. He missed the quiet of before. The world was loud now. Everyone had an opinion about who he was, what he meant, what he represented, and none of it matched the truth. He was just a kid who didn't want someone to die. At the same time, across town, the principal met with the district superintendent behind closed doors. She was nervous, not about Shamari's well-being, but about optics. "We have to contain this," the superintendent said. "It's racial optics now. We can't afford to look like we mishandled this." Karen Stroud nodded. "The family's making noise, especially the mother. Then maybe we remind her of consequences," the superintendent replied carefully. "Procedural ones." Karen frowned. "Consequences?" The man leaned forward. "You said the boy performed a medical procedure unsupervised, correct? We could argue it endangered the teacher further. CPS might be interested in whether he's receiving appropriate supervision at home." Her stomach turned. "You want to call Child Protective Services?" He didn't answer directly, just said sometimes pressure ends problems quietly. She didn't respond, but her silence was complicity. The next afternoon, Tamika was folding laundry when the phone rang. Unknown number. She answered absently. "Hello?" A woman's voice came through, soft but clinical. "Mrs. Watson, this is Denise from Missouri Child Protective Services. We received a report regarding your son, Jamari. We'd like to schedule a home visit to discuss concerns raised by the school district." Tamika's body went cold. "Concerns?" she repeated slowly. "What kind of concerns?" "Just a standard welfare check," the woman said gently. "We can come tomorrow at 3. The line went dead. Tamika stood in silence, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. The laundry slipped from her hands. Her son had saved a life, and now they were coming for his. But while the world debated his intentions, Jamari's mother received a call from Child Protective Services. She expected a thank you. Instead, they questioned her parenting. Tamika Watson had faced fear before. She'd faced it in emergency rooms, gripping the wrists of patients whose pulses flickered like candlelight. She'd faced it in late-night ambulance runs, when sirens screamed through the Missouri dark. But this fear, this quiet, calculated fear that crawled into her living room, disguised as bureaucracy, felt different. It wasn't chaos, it was control, and it was aimed directly at her family. The call from Child Protective Services echoed in her ears long after it ended. Concerns raised by the school district. The woman's tone had been gentle, too gentle. The kind that tried to sound harmless while holding a knife behind its back. Tamika sat on the couch, still holding the phone long after the line went dead. Jamari was in his room upstairs, earbuds in, music faint. She didn't want to tell him yet. Not until she figured out how to say it without shaking. The clock on the wall ticked, cruelly steady. She had spent her life saving other people's lives. And now, someone had decided she was unfit to protect her own sons. Tamika had raised Jamari alone. His father, Marcus, was a name that belonged to the past. A summer fling that turned into heartbreak before it became memory. He wasn't cruel, just careless. He'd disappeared before Jamari's first birthday, leaving behind a car seat, a baby blanket, and a promise he never kept. Tamika didn't complain. She worked. Day shifts, night shifts, whatever it took to keep the lights on, and her boy fed. She finished nursing school, while Jamari was still in diapers. Graduated top of her class, passed her boards, and landed a job at Mercy General Hospital. Her coworkers called her the calm in the chaos. Her patients called her the angel in scrubs. But outside those white hospital walls, she was just another single black mother in a system that didn't trust her. She knew it. She lived it. She prepared for it. Every decision she made, every bedtime rule, every curfew, every warning, came from one lesson her own mother had drilled into her. You can't raise a black son in this country without armor. The world will call him dangerous long before he ever does a dangerous thing. And so she gave Jamari armor, not made of steel, but of discipline, patience, and grace. She taught him to say yes ma'am, and no sir, to keep his hands visible when speaking to authority, to never argue with teachers, even when they were wrong, to let respect cover him, like a second skin, even when it burned. It worked, until now, when she finally told Jamari about the CPS visit. He didn't look angry, he just looked tired. "They think you did something wrong?" he asked quietly. "They think we did," she said, her voice trembling, despite her effort to sound calm. He frowned. "Because I helped her? Because you helped her?" she echoed bitterly. There was a silence between them that didn't feel like peace. It felt like the pause before thunder. Jamari looked away, jaw clenched. So what do we do? She forced a smile she didn't feel. We do what we've always done. We stay calm. We tell the truth. But deep down, she knew that in systems like this, truth wasn't always enough. When the CPS agent arrived the next afternoon, Tamika's house looked spotless. She'd spent hours cleaning, not because it was dirty, but because she knew she had to prove worthiness in every detail. Every countertop, every shelf, every smile. The woman who arrived, Denise, looked polite but distant. Her clipboard was her weapon. "Thank you for meeting with me, Mrs. Watson," she said, stepping inside. "This is just a routine welfare check." Tamika gestured to the couch. "Please have a seat." Denise sat, crossed her legs, and began. So the report from the school mentioned concerns about Jamari's behavior, specifically allegations of aggression and classroom disruption. Tamika blinked slowly. "Aggression? You mean when he performed CPR to save a woman's life?" Denise gave a sympathetic smile, the kind that meant I can't say I agree, but I can't say I don't. We just have to verify details, she said softly. "Was Jamari ever involved in disciplinary action before this?" "No," Tamika said sharply. "Never. He's an honor student. You can check his record." Denise scribbled notes. "And has he shown any unusual emotional changes since the incident?" Tamika stared. "Unusual? He's been traumatized by the way your system's treating him." Denise hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, then nodded. "I understand. We just need to check his room and speak to him briefly." Tamika's throat tightened, but she nodded. When they reached Jamari's room, he stood respectful but guarded. His walls were lined with academic certificates, debate trophies, and photos from his youth volunteer program. His bed was made. His books were stacked neatly. Denise smiled faintly. "You have a very organized space, Jamari." "Yes, ma'am," he replied. "My mom raised me that way." She paused, looked around one last time, and said, "Thank you. That'll be all." When the door finally closed behind her, Tamika's composure cracked. She sank onto the couch, face buried in her hands. Her chest shook, but she refused to let herself cry loud enough for her son to hear. It wasn't shame she felt. It was exhaustion. Exhaustion from fighting battles she never started. Exhaustion from proving her son's innocence in a world that assumed guilt by default. Exhaustion from watching systems designed to protect people twist into tools that punished the wrong ones. The next morning she called the school. Principal Stroud answered after 2 transfers, her tone sterile and clipped. "Mrs. Watson, I can assure you we're doing everything by the book," she said. "By the book?" Tamika snapped. "Your book says it's okay to call CPS on a kid who saved a life?" "Mrs. Watson." "No. Listen to me," Tamika said, voice shaking with restrained fury. "You called him unauthorized. You erased his name. You turned his kindness into a crime. And now you've dragged my family into this mess. You will not bury my son." There was a pause on the other end. When Stroud spoke, her tone was colder. "Mrs. Watson, I understand your frustration, but your behavior right now is becoming combative." "Combative?" Tamika repeated, her voice low. "That word again. You all love that word when it's us, don't you? Please calm down." "No," she said sharply. "You don't get to police my tone while my son's reputation burns because you couldn't stomach admitting you were wrong." Stroud's voice hardened. "If you continue this manner of communication, I'll have to end the call." Tamika laughed bitterly. "End the call then. But this isn't ending with you." She hung up. That night, Jamari overheard her on the phone again, this time with a friend from her nursing union, a woman named Sheila. "They've backed her version of events all the way," Tamika said. "They called my baby aggressive, the same hands that kept that woman breathing." "You know what they're doing," Sheila replied grimly. "They're protecting the district. If they admit what he did was heroic, they also admit they punished him unfairly before. Liability, lawsuits, they can't afford that." Tamika sighed. "They'll twist it until we look like the problem, then twist back," Sheila said. "You've got proof, right? There were cameras in that classroom." Tamika paused. "They said the footage wasn't available yet." Sheila exhaled sharply. "Girl, you know what that means. They're hiding it." Tamika's mind raced. She had worked in hospitals long enough to know how institutions buried truth under policy. But something inside her, a small burning light that refused to dim, told her this wasn't over. 2 days later her phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. Just one message, one file attachment, and 5 words. You should see this first. The video was grainy, pulled from a security camera in room 213. The angle was wide, black and white, timestamp blinking in the corner. It showed Mrs. Langston collapsing mid-step. Students panicking. Then, Jamari. He ran forward, clear as daylight, dropping to his knees beside her, commanding order through chaos. His movements were precise, his composure unshakable. It showed everything the school's narrative left out. The bravery, the leadership, the compassion. And just as clearly, it showed Principal Stroud, standing at the door moments later, watching as Jamari performed compressions, and doing nothing to help. Tamika froze the frame, Stroud's face expressionless, hands folded while her son fought to save a life. That was the truth. That was what they had buried. Her hands trembled as she replayed it again and again. The grainy footage didn't just prove Jamari's innocence, it exposed the district's indifference. And whoever sent it had just cracked the school's wall of silence wide open. Then came the leaked footage, grainy security cam clips that shattered the school's version of events. No aggression, no threat, just a teen saving a life, and still being treated like a problem. The video leaked on a Wednesday morning. No warning, no context, just 28 seconds of grainy footage that ripped apart everything the school had tried to hide. By noon, it had gone viral. It started as a quiet upload to a small community page called Missouri Speaks. Within an hour, it was reposted on TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram. By lunchtime, it had millions of views. The clip opened on the classroom, a still frame from the overhead security camera in room. The timestamp blinked, Friday 10:34 a.m. The students were seated, papers in hand. Mrs. Langston stood near the whiteboard, writing something out. Then it happened. She faltered mid-step. The marker slipped from her hand. Her body twisted awkwardly before she collapsed to the ground. And in that moment, as the rest of the class froze in confusion, one figure stood up. Jamari. He moved fast. No hesitation, no fear. His motions were steady, trained. He knelt beside her, checked her pulse, and started CPR. Even through the fuzzy footage, his calmness was visible. Every movement was methodical, controlled, compassionate. He wasn't flailing. He wasn't panicking. He was saving a life. It was everything the school's statement wasn't. Because the official report said presence of an unassigned student. The video showed presence of a savior. And when the clip reached the public, the contrast was too sharp to ignore. Tamika sat in her living room watching it over and over again. She didn't know who had sent it. Maybe a teacher. Maybe a student tired of the silence. But whoever they were, they'd handed her truth on a silver platter. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing. News outlets, activists, talk shows, strangers sending messages from across the country. She answered one call from a reporter from the St. Louis Herald. "Mrs. Watson," the woman said, her voice firm but empathetic. "We've reviewed the footage. Your son did everything right. The school's statement doesn't match what we're seeing." Tamika's throat tightened. "I told them. I told everyone. But they painted him like he didn't belong." The reporter sighed softly. "They'll regret that." Across social media, people were angry, but not just angry. They were heartbroken. One viral tweet read, "This is how black excellence gets punished." He followed every rule, acted heroically, and they still called him unauthorized. "Justice for Jamari," another said. "You can see the teacher breathing again after he starts compressions. He saved her. Give that boy his flowers."
The phrase caught on. Within hours, a hashtag began trending nationwide. Give Jamari his flowers.
Educators shared it. Nurses reposted it. Even EMTs commented, "He performed perfect CPR under stress." Most adults freeze. "This kid deserves a medal." Clips of Jamari circulated alongside the school's cold, sanitized email. The side-by-side comparisons were devastating. One screen showed humanity in motion. The other bureaucratic cruelty disguised as protocol. People began splicing the footage into reaction videos. Some crying, some shaking their heads in disbelief. "He did everything right," said one woman, her voice trembling. "Everything this world tells young black men to do. Stay calm, act right, be respectful." And they still treated him like he didn't belong. By Thursday, national media had picked it up. Good Morning America, CNN, MSNBC. Everyone wanted an interview. But Jamari didn't want to speak. He avoided reporters, stayed off social media, buried himself in books in silence. When Tamika asked him why, he said quietly, I don't want to be famous for this. I just want my name back. She didn't push. She understood. He wasn't looking for a spotlight. He was looking for dignity. Meanwhile, at Stonebridge High, chaos simmered behind locked doors. Principal Stroud's office, lights stayed on late, into the night. Emails flooded in from district officials, lawyers, angry parents. She printed each one, redacted names, built a folder labeled Crisis Response. She held emergency meetings with the superintendent. They used words like optics, damage control, narrative realignment. But the one word no one said aloud was truth. Inside the teacher's lounge, whispers spread.
They can't hide it anymore.
The footage makes them look awful. Stroud's finished. Someone even leaked an internal memo, one that showed Stroud had seen the security footage before releasing the original statement. It confirmed what many already suspected. The administration knew the truth and buried it anyway. Outside, the students revolted. They wore stickers that read unassigned, but unbroken. They painted "Thank you, Jamari" on the sidewalk near the front doors. Some held signs at the gates. He saved a life. You tried to erase it. One senior, Talia Green, spoke to a reporter on camera. Jamari's been quiet since freshman year. Teachers never gave him trouble, until one did. Now he saves someone's life, and suddenly they call him unauthorized? We see what this is. Her video alone racked up 2 million views. But the real shock came when a local teacher leaked another clip. The original faculty meeting right after the incident. In it, Principal Stroud's voice could be heard saying, "We have to manage perception. If this turns into a racial thing, we're finished." A teacher's voice responded off-screen, but he saved her. Stroud's reply was cold, precise. That's not the point. He wasn't assigned to that class. The audio was short, blurry, but undeniable. And once it hit the internet, the school couldn't hide anymore. Jamari watched it all unfold in silence. The praise, the outrage, the commentary. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just stared at the television, face blank. Tamika sat beside him, her hand resting on his knee. "You see what they're saying, baby?" she whispered. "They know the truth now. The world knows." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, but why did it have to get this far for them to believe it?" She had no answer. Late that night, he received a text from an unknown number. "You shouldn't have posted that video. You're making people angry." No name, just the warning. He showed it to his mother. She told him to ignore it, but he couldn't, because it meant someone inside the school. Someone close was watching. The next morning, CNN aired a longer version of the classroom footage. The anchors discussed it in slow, somber tones. "Notice his posture," one said. "There's no aggression here, just composure." Another chimed in. "The language of that school statement. It's a case study in systemic bias, calling him unauthorized instead of heroic. That's how institutions dehumanize." Clips from the broadcast spread everywhere. Educators across the country wrote open letters. One superintendent from Chicago said, "If this were my student, we'd be naming the auditorium after him." By evening, national celebrities had joined in. A popular actor tweeted, "This young man did everything right. Give Jamari Watson his flowers. Give Jamari his flowers." Even Mrs. Langston's husband, still shaken from the event, broke his silence online. "My wife is alive because of that boy." That's the truth. At the same time, the district's lawyers went into overdrive. They issued a statement, attempting to downplay the leak. "We are aware of the unauthorized release of internal footage. While we cannot comment on specifics, we urge the community to withhold judgment until the investigation concludes." But the world had already judged them. Tamika's living room became a newsroom. Reporters lined up outside. Neighbors dropped off food and cards. Jamari stayed in his room mostly, overwhelmed by attention. One night, Tamika found him sitting on the floor, lights off, staring at his phone. "Baby, you okay?" He nodded slowly. "They're saying I'm a hero. But it doesn't feel like it." She crouched beside him. "Why not?" He took a long breath. "Because I had to save her life for them to see mine." Tamika's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. The next day, another journalist published a slowed-down version of the security footage. They zoomed in, not on Jamari or Mrs. Langston, but on the background, on the door, where Principal Stroud stood during the chaos. And just before she turned to leave, another figure appeared, a teacher whispering into her ear. The caption read, "Who was this?" The report was filed minutes later. The internet exploded again. People began speculating. Theories spread. Screenshots circled. Who was the teacher? What did they say? Why did the report change after that whisper? The story that had already divided a city now had a new mystery. And for Jamari and his mother it meant one thing. Someone had known the truth all along and helped bury it. But in the background of the footage, someone noticed a teacher whispering into the principal's ear. Right before the report was written, they saw the footage, then erased the context. 2 hours after Mrs. Langston was rolled out on a stretcher, while her students were being dismissed early under the vague guise of a faculty emergency. A very different kind of emergency was taking place in the back conference room of Stonebridge High, one with no sirens, no medics, only suits, silence and strategy. The lights were dimmed, the blinds drawn. The air was thick with the unsaid. Principal Karen Stroud stood at the head of the table, lips tight, jaw set. She was flanked by Vice Principal Tanner Marks and District Liaison Lydia Coburn, who'd arrived within an hour of the incident. 3 other senior staff sat nervously with their hands folded, eyeing the muted monitor mounted on the wall. On screen, the paused footage from the security camera in room 213. Timestamp, Friday 10:34. Stroud pointed to the still frame, Jamari kneeling beside Mrs. Langston, initiating CPR. I don't want this footage shared, she said flatly. Not yet. Lydia Coburn leaned forward. We have to get ahead of this, Karen. That video's going to get out. Someone's always watching. We need to control the language before it controls us, Tanner added. The problem is optics. It's not about what he did. It's about what people will think it means. Another teacher, Mr. Dillard, shifted uncomfortably. But what he did was right. I mean, he saved her life. That's what the footage shows. And we're not disputing that, Stroud snapped. We're simply deciding how to frame it. The room fell silent. That word frame hung in the air like a loaded gun. On the monitor, the video resumed. Students frozen, panic visible, and Jamari, moving like a practiced hand of mercy, focused and unshaken. It was undeniable. It was clear. And that clarity terrified them. Because what the video didn't show were the things they had quietly believed to be true. The threat, the disruption, the imagined disorder they projected onto students like Jamari. It didn't confirm their biases. It dismantled them. And that made it dangerous. Coburn folded her hands. We need to consider the ripple effect. If we label him a hero, then we have to answer why he was kicked out of his original class in the first place. Why he was reassigned. That puts us on unstable ground. Stroud nodded grimly. And it opens the door to liability. We cannot risk a civil rights case over a misinterpreted incident. Misinterpreted. Another word that sounded safer than buried. The room began to spiral into strategy. We can thank emergency responders, one teacher offered. Make it sound like the system worked. And call it an unsanctioned medical response, someone else suggested. Emphasize protocol was breached. Exactly, Tanner agreed. We don't want to encourage unsanctioned classroom disruptions. Even if they're well-meaning, it sets a precedent. Mr. Dillard's voice was soft but firm. A precedent for what? Saving someone's life. Stroud shot him a look. You're missing the bigger picture. No, he said, leaning forward, voice rising. I think you're ignoring it. But no one backed him up. Not then. Because in that room, truth was no longer the objective. The narrative was. They drafted a statement. Cold. Sterile. Carefully worded. It mentioned a medical emergency. It praised swift action by emergency personnel. And at the bottom, buried in bureaucratic detachment, it noted the presence of an unassigned student currently under review. No name. No act of heroism. No acknowledgement. Just omission. And omission, they knew, could be weaponized. While this meeting was happening, Jamari was at home in silence. Tamika sat beside him, scrolling through her phone, watching the community slowly turn outrage into momentum. But what they didn't know, what no one outside that room knew, was that the district had already seen the video, had already decided to ignore it. And worse, someone inside had whispered into Stroud's ear, minutes after Jamari started CPR. A warning, a reminder, a threat. That someone had been Miss Reed, a senior history teacher, and one of the longest tenured staff at the school. Her voice had been caught faintly in the background of the security footage, her silhouette blurry but unmistakable. She had approached Stroud at the doorway and said 5 words. He's not supposed to be here. Not is she okay. Not what can we do. Not thank God. Someone helped. Just those 5 words. And that whisper shifted everything. Because within 20 minutes of that moment, the first draft of the school statement was written, void of humanity, bloated with legal insulation. Meanwhile, Mrs. Langston remained unconscious at Mercy General Hospital. She was stable but sedated. The doctors said she'd had a mild heart attack, brought on by an undiagnosed arrhythmia. The only reason she was alive, they said, was because someone had started compressions immediately. "Who did it?" her husband had asked quietly. The nurse shrugged. "Student, we're told. A boy named Jamari Watson." That name echoed in his mind. He knew it. He'd heard Carol mention it once. Back at Stonebridge, another meeting was underway. This time with the district's PR consultant, a polished man in a slim gray suit named Marcus Flannery. He'd been called in to manage crises before, but this one had a different texture. "Your biggest threat," he told Stroud, "isn't the truth, it's the perception of intention." Stroud frowned. Meaning, if people believe you minimized a black student's heroic act because of race, then no amount of statements will fix that. You need a diversion. A new storyline. "What do you suggest?" she asked. He smiled thinly. "Create chaos elsewhere. Leak a different incident. Discredit his past. Give people something messier to argue about." The room was quiet. Ben Tanner leaned forward. "We could mention his previous write-ups. Disciplinary marks from freshman year. Maybe frame it as a complex student with a challenging history." Mr. Dillard stood up. "You're talking about character assassination." Marcus didn't flinch. "I'm talking about strategy." And with that, the seeds were planted. They weren't just covering a narrative now. They were rewriting one. But what no one in that room knew, what none of their emails, drafts, or whispered plans accounted for, was that Mrs. Langston was beginning to wake up. Her eyes fluttered open slowly, the sterile white ceiling above her unfamiliar. Machines beeped softly beside her. She reached weakly for the call button. A nurse rushed in. "Mrs. Langston, you're in Mercy General. You had a cardiac event. You're okay now. Just rest." Her voice was hoarse. "What happened?" "You collapsed. A student." He performed CPR before the medics arrived. Langston blinked. "A student?" "Yes, ma'am. A boy named Jamari Watson." The name hit her like cold water. She didn't speak for a long moment. Then she whispered, "Is he okay?" The nurse smiled. "He's fine. He saved your life." Mrs. Langston's eyes closed again, but not from fatigue, from something heavier, because she remembered everything. His face, his quiet nature, the way she never said his name, the way she had dismissed him, and now he was the reason her heart was still beating. She whispered again, weaker this time. "Where is he?" Word of her awakening traveled quickly through the hospital corridors, and by morning reached the ears of Principal Stroud. "Mrs. Langston's conscious," her secretary said cautiously. "She's asking questions." Stroud's stomach turned. About what? The secretary hesitated. About Jamari. About the video. She wants to speak to the media. The blood drained from Stroud's face. Because they had built their entire strategy on the assumption that Mrs. Langston wouldn't remember, that her silence was permanent, that the video could be denied, the truth reworded, the hero erased. But now the one person they had centered the narrative around, the one they assumed would stay quiet, was ready to speak. But when she woke up, her first question wasn't what anyone expected. The woman who once ignored him now owed him her life. The world was bright, sterile, and unbearably still when Mrs. Carol Langston opened her eyes. At first she didn't know where she was. The faint smell of disinfectant, the steady beep of a heart monitor, the weight of an oxygen cannula resting beneath her nose, all of it felt unreal, like waking up inside someone else's life. Her throat was dry when she tried to speak.
Where am I?"
A nurse appeared by her side, kind but efficient. "You're at Mercy General Hospital. You went into cardiac arrest at school last Friday. You've been under observation." Langston's eyes fluttered weakly. "Cardiac arrest?" Her voice cracked. "At school?" The nurse nodded. "You're very lucky. One of your students started CPR right away. The doctors said it made all the difference." Langston blinked, trying to process the words. "A student?" "Yes, ma'am," the nurse replied, adjusting her IV line. "A young man. I believe his name was Jamari Watson." The name landed like a stone in her chest. Jamari Watson. Her mind pulled at the edges of the memory, piecing together fragments. A quiet boy in the back of the room, eyes that never challenged hers, a soft-spoken voice that never caused trouble. She remembered the day he arrived, unannounced, reassigned, an unassigned student, as the office had called him. She'd barely spoken to him all week, and now, he'd saved her life. Langston's pulse monitor began to quicken. She closed her eyes and whispered, "I want to see him." The nurse hesitated. "He's not here, Mrs. Langston. But I can bring you the school statement, if you'd like." Langston shook her head weakly. "No, I want to see his face. The student who did this." The nurse nodded. "I'll see what I can do." Hours later, as afternoon light poured through the blinds, the hospital room door creaked open. Langston's husband, Peter, stepped in, his eyes swollen from sleeplessness. He carried a bouquet of lilies, her favorite, but even he couldn't disguise the unease written across his face. "Hey," he said softly, sitting beside her bed. "You scared me half to death." She managed a faint smile. "I scared myself too," he laughed under his breath, though it came out more like a sigh. Then after a pause, he said, "They told me a student saved you." Langston nodded slowly. "Yes. They said his name was Jamari." Peter frowned, searching his memory. "You've mentioned that name before, haven't you? One of your new transfers?" Langston's gaze drifted to the window. "Yes. Quiet boy. Barely spoke. I thought he was disinterested." Peter tilted his head. "And now?" She closed her eyes. "Now I don't know what to think." He hesitated, then pulled out his phone. "There's something you should see." He opened a social media app and turned the screen toward her. It was the video, the one the entire country had already seen. The footage from the classroom camera. Langston's breath hitched. On the screen, she saw herself collapse, papers scattered, the chaos that followed, students frozen in confusion, and then the boy, Jamari. He didn't hesitate. He didn't panic. He simply moved. His actions were calm, deliberate, life-saving. His face, focused, compassionate, was illuminated by the overhead light. His hands pressed rhythmically against her chest, his lips moving as he counted quietly to himself. And in the corner of the frame, she saw something else, herself helpless and pale, as that boy, the one she'd barely acknowledged, kept her alive. Her chest tightened. "That's him," she whispered. "That's the boy." Peter nodded gently. "They say he kept going until the paramedics came. The doctors told me it was textbook perfect CPR. Said he must have been trained." Langston's throat closed. Her voice came out as a whisper. "I thought he was disengaged. I thought he didn't care." Peter reached for her hand. "Seems like he cared more than anyone." She didn't respond. She just stared at the screen again, eyes locked on Jamari's movements, watching the strength in his arms, the steadiness in his eyes. There was no fear there, only purpose. She replayed the video 5 times, each one slower than the last. By the end, she was crying quietly, bitterly. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the hospital TV played the same clip she had just seen. But this time, it was on national news. A commentator spoke solemnly. "This young man, 17-year-old Jamari Watson, is being hailed online as a hero after performing CPR on his teacher, Mrs. Carol Langston, who suffered cardiac arrest in class last Friday." Langston's stomach turned as the camera cut to the principal's statement, the one she knew all too well by now. "We are currently reviewing safety protocols regarding the presence of an unassigned student in the classroom." Unassigned student. Her lips parted. "Unassigned," she murmured. "That's how they described him." Peter looked at her carefully. "You didn't see that statement?" She shook her head. "I was still unconscious. They tried to make it sound like he did something wrong." Langston's hands trembled. "He saved me, Peter. He saved me." "I know," he said quietly. "But they're protecting themselves. You know how schools are." She stared at the TV screen, her reflection faintly visible over Jamari's frozen image. "They erased him," she whispered. "Just like I did." The guilt came slowly at first, an ache she could ignore, but the more she thought, the heavier it grew. It pressed down on her chest like a phantom weight, suffocating in its truth. Flashbacks replayed in her mind. Jamari's first day in her class, her dismissive tone, the way she avoided calling on him, the moment she caught him glancing at her, and assumed attitude instead of curiosity. She had seen what she wanted to see. Not a student, not a person, just a stereotype she didn't realize she'd built. In her 22 years of teaching, she had prided herself on being fair, consistent, professional. But fairness without self-awareness was just blindness dressed up as policy. She remembered the meetings she'd sat through, nodding at diversity seminars she didn't believe she needed. She remembered the other teachers who spoke about certain kids in coded tones, and how she'd said nothing. She remembered the quiet satisfaction she felt in her authority, her control, and she remembered Jamari, his stillness, his quiet dignity, how she had mistaken it for defiance, how she had never once asked him how he was adjusting, or what he needed. And yet, when her heart betrayed her, his didn't. That night, she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him kneeling beside her, heard his calm voice cutting through chaos. She saw his face again and again, the same face she had ignored all week. She sat up in bed, tears streaming down her cheeks. Peter stirred beside her. "Carol, what's wrong?" "I need to see him," she whispered. "I need to see Jamari Watson." He frowned. "Honey, the district's already in damage control mode. They're saying very little right now. Maybe wait until—" "No," she said sharply, surprising herself with the firmness in her tone. "I need to see him now. I need him to know I was wrong." Peter studied her face, the determination there. "Then tell them. Tell everyone." The next morning, her doctor came in for routine rounds. He smiled kindly. "You're recovering well. You might be discharged in a few days." Langston looked at him seriously. "Doctor, may I ask, did you see the video?" He hesitated, then nodded. "We all saw it. It's extraordinary what that young man did. You're lucky." She swallowed hard. "I want to meet him. I'll reach out to the school district," he said carefully. "But Mrs. Langston, there's a lot of media attention around this right now. It may take time." She shook her head. "I don't care about the cameras. I just need to talk to him." When the nurse came to change her IV, she caught sight of Langston's TV. The evening news was showing another angle of the story. Reporters standing outside the school, students chanting, "Give Jamari his flowers." The nurse smiled faintly. "Looks like the world's on his side." Langston turned toward her, voice trembling. "It should have been me, the one speaking for him, the one defending him, not stranger." The nurse gave her a gentle look. "Then maybe it still can be." Hours later, when the district's public relations officer arrived to check on her, a formality they framed as support, Langston made her decision. The woman smiled too widely, clipboard in hand. "Mrs. Langston, we're so glad you're feeling better. We've been fielding a lot of media inquiries, but we think it's best if you rest for now. We don't want to add stress." Langston's gaze was steady. "Stress isn't what I'm worried about." The woman blinked. "I'm sorry? I want to speak to the media," Langston said clearly. The smile faltered. "Mrs. Langston, that's not advisable right now." Langston leaned forward slightly, her hospital gown rustling. "I'm not asking for permission." The woman hesitated. "If you go public, you could complicate the district's investigation." Langston interrupted, her voice trembling with conviction. "Your district erased the boy who saved my life. You're worried about optics. I'm worried about truth." The woman's professional composure cracked for just a moment. "Please think carefully." "I have," Langston said, eyes fierce now. "And if I'm well enough to talk, I'm well enough to tell the truth." That evening she made the call herself to a local reporter whose number she found in her husband's messages. "This is Mrs. Langston," she said quietly into the phone. "The teacher from Stonebridge High." There was a pause on the other end. Then the reporter's voice, cautious but eager. "Yes, ma'am. We've been trying to reach you. Are you ready to make a statement?" Langston's fingers trembled around the phone. "Yes," she said softly, "but I want to do it alone." And then she asked to speak to the media. Alone. She could have stayed silent, but she chose accountability. It wasn't the school's PR team that arranged the press conference. It wasn't the district superintendent or a lawyer. It wasn't a carefully rehearsed speech with bullet points and buffered language. It was Mrs. Carol Langston. Alone. The venue was a modest community hall on the edge of Stonebridge, tucked between a library and a youth center. Folding chairs, a static-filled mic on a stand, 3 rows of local reporters, and a few members of the community. Nothing flashy, just intention. Tamika sat quietly in the back, shoulders tight. Jamari didn't come. At 3:00 p.m. sharp, Langston stepped to the mic, pale, thinner than before, still recovering from her hospitalization. But her eyes carried the weight of a decision she had wrestled with in silence. In her hands, a single sheet of paper. She didn't read it. "I've been a teacher for 22 years, she said, voice shaking slightly, but firm. "I always believed I was fair. I believed I was consistent. I believed I knew how to read my students. She paused. But I got it wrong. The room went still. Last week, I suffered a cardiac arrest in my classroom. I would not be standing here today if not for a young man named Jamari Watson. A few pens halted mid-sentence. I barely knew Jamari. I didn't try to. I made assumptions about him. Quiet, withdrawn, possibly unmotivated. I saw things that weren't there, and I failed to see what was. Her voice cracked but didn't break. When he saved me, when he performed CPR, and kept me alive until help arrived, I was unconscious. But the world wasn't, and the world saw what I refused to. Langston gripped the edge of the podium. I judged him through a lens I didn't know I was still carrying. I saw his silence as defiance, his presence as disruption, and I now realized that in doing so, I not only failed him, I failed my duty as an educator. Cameras flashed. No one interrupted. The school's statement erased him, sanitized what happened, called him unassigned, as if that detail mattered more than the fact that he saved a life. A long pause. I want to say this clearly, to anyone watching, to Jamari, to his family. I am sorry, deeply, publicly, completely. The room was silent. She stepped back from the mic and walked away. Within hours, the footage was everywhere. Stonebridge teacher apologizes for racial bias after student saves her life. The headlines spread like wildfire. Langston's apology ignited national conversation. The hashtag shifted. Give Jamari his flowers now shared space with She Owned It. And apologize like Langston. Twitter threads broke down every line of her speech. A black educator truth. She named it. Didn't deflect. Didn't center herself. That's what accountability looks like. A justice unfiltered. It took bravery to admit that kind of bias. The world watched her say it aloud. That matters.
Prof. Whiteboard. No PR spin. No legal shielding. Just raw truth. This moment will be studied.
Even conservative outlets, while attempting to downplay the racial component, acknowledged the rarity of such a public reversal. But the reaction wasn't all positive. Inside the Stonebridge School District office, chaos brewed. Principal Stroud's inbox flooded. Angry emails, press requests, concerned donors. Tanner Marks called her within minutes of the video airing. She just went rogue. Stroud's tone was clipped. And now we're exposed. You think she's bluffing? You think she's done? Stroud didn't answer. Because she knew Langston wasn't bluffing. And she wasn't done. At home, Tamika rewatched the speech 3 times. Her fingers trembled. She didn't cry. She couldn't. Something inside her refused to soften. Even now. When Jamari finally came downstairs, she didn't speak. She just handed him the remote. He watched it in full silence. His hands rested still in his lap. Unreadable. After a long pause, Tamika asked, "You believe her?" Jamari exhaled. "I think she means it." Tamika studied him. But meaning it doesn't undo what it did." She nodded slowly.
No.
"It doesn't. But maybe it opens a door." Jamari didn't respond. He just stared at the paused image on the screen. Langston's hand trembling over the microphone. The next morning, a nurse found a letter slipped under Langston's hospital room door. No return address. Just a sheet of paper with ink smudged along the edges. "You picked the wrong side. You should have stayed quiet. You'll regret this. So will he." She crumpled the paper before the nurse could read it. But the message stuck with her like a stain. At the same time, Tamika received a similar note in her mailbox. "You people always want to be the victim. Keep your boy in line, or someone else will." Jamari found her standing over the letter in the kitchen. The blood drained from her face, but her expression was tight controlled. He read it, folded it, tossed it in the trash. "They're scared," he said. "Of what?" Tamika asked. "Of the truth." More came in the days after. Emails. Anonymous voicemails. Graffiti scrawled on Langston's car while it was parked in the hospital lot. "Traitor." Reporters began referring to the situation, not just as a story of redemption, but as a flashpoint, a line in the sand. Because for every person praising Langston's courage, there was someone else calling it betrayal. For every person celebrating Jamari, there was someone whispering about disruption, aggression, danger. The racism that once wore a suit, now wore a mask. But it hadn't disappeared. It had simply changed shape. Still, Langston did not back down. When the district called and advised her to pause public engagement, she refused. When a representative offered to help her reword her next statement to be less emotionally charged, She hung up. And when she returned to her home after discharge, she did so with her head high, even as neighbors avoided eye contact. She had chosen a side. Now she would live with the cost. And Jamari? He remained quiet. He didn't speak to the press. He didn't post online. He didn't react to the threats. But something had shifted. He walked through the hallways of his school, with the same posture, the same calm, but now the silence followed him like a storm cloud. Some kids whispered. Others stared. Teachers were split. Some offered quiet nods of respect. Others avoided him altogether. He didn't mind the stares. He minded the silence that still lingered from the people who hadn't said anything when it mattered. One evening, a student reporter from the school paper asked Jamari for a quote. Something simple. He stared at the notepad. Then, after a long pause, said, "They erased me. She tried to write me back in. That's all I got." The student nodded, scribbled it down, and walked away. It was published the next morning. Front page. "They erased me. She tried to write me back in. Jamari Watson." The article went viral, and the threats intensified. But then came the death threats to both of them. The first letter came folded into an unmarked envelope. No stamp. No return address. Just one line scrawled in jagged handwriting. "You should have stayed quiet." Tamika found it wedged into her screen door on a Monday morning. She read it twice before crumpling it, dropping it into the trash, and washing her hands like it was poison. But by Tuesday, 2 more arrived. One for her, one for Jamari. "You're making the school look bad. Stop playing the victim." The third one chilled her. "You won't make it to court." She didn't tell Jamari right away. He had enough to carry. But by Wednesday afternoon, when she caught him picking up the torn remnants of another note from the mailbox, she didn't have to. He already knew. "They want us scared," Jamari said, voice low. "They think we'll back down." Tamika met his eyes, a mother's fire behind her exhaustion. Then they've never met a Watson. But fear doesn't always come roaring through the front door. Sometimes it arrives quietly, like silence from people you thought would stand beside you. The Watsons' neighbors began keeping their distance. The Johnsons, who once brought over peach cobbler every other Sunday, now waved without stopping. The church elder who used to greet Tamika with warm hugs, now offered thin smiles and quick exits. At the grocery store, whispers trailed her. That's her, the one stirring up all that trouble. It wasn't always hostility. Sometimes it was something worse. Avoidance. People acting like they didn't see her at all. Meanwhile, online, the threats multiplied. Fake accounts posted Jamari's photo with captions like, "Not a hero," "An agitator." A right-wing blog ran an article titled, "The Teen Who Turned a Heart Attack into a Hate Hoax." The comments were a cesspool of racism thinly disguised as skepticism. "Bet he exaggerated it for attention, always playing the race card. Watch next, he'll say the heart attack was racist." Tamika stopped reading after the first paragraph. But Jamari didn't. He sat in the dim light of his room, scrolling through the venom, face expressionless. His friends texted support, but he didn't answer much anymore. Every time he picked up his phone, his name felt heavier. At school, the atmosphere had changed. Stonebridge High had turned into a silent battlefield. A few teachers looked at him differently now, with respect, even gratitude, but others looked away altogether. Some students avoided him. Others whispered as he passed. He heard the word attention seeker more than once. He heard worse in the bathrooms, muttered racial slurs that trailed off when he entered. The administration, desperate to calm the storm, made a decision that only poured gasoline on it. They placed Mrs. Langston on administrative leave for her safety. The email to staff was sterile and rehearsed. Due to escalating public attention, and for the protection of our faculty, Mrs. Langston will be on leave until further notice. There was no mention of why she needed protection. No mention of the fact that the threats she'd received came not from Jamari's supporters, but from people who thought she had betrayed her race by apologizing. In her small hospital room, still recovering, Mrs. Langston scrolled through the comments under her press conference video. The first few pages were kind thank yous, blessings, praise for her courage. But deeper down, the tone changed, white guilt at its finest. "She's just doing this to look progressive. Maybe she should have died instead of selling us out." She dropped her phone onto the blanket, hands shaking. She didn't tell her husband about the anonymous calls that came late at night, with voices whispering, "Traitor." For a while, the Watsons tried to live as if things were normal. Tamika still worked her shifts at the hospital. Jamari still went to school. But every routine was edged with tension now. At night, Tamika triple-checked the locks. She caught herself jumping at small sounds. An engine idling too long outside. Footsteps that lingered on the porch. One afternoon, she came home to find her car windshield cracked with a rock. No note this time, just the word enough carved faintly into the hood with a key. She didn't call the police. She didn't need another report that went nowhere. Then, one evening, the news station that had first aired Jamari's story ran an update.
They framed it as balanced coverage.
The Stonebridge district maintains that their response followed policy, the anchor said, perfectly composed. Officials also claim the online backlash has been exaggerated by outside influences, seeking to divide the community.
Cut to a parent interview.
A white father in a polo shirt. It's sad what happened, but we can't let one story turn this school into a racial circus. We're all tired of the drama. Tamika turned the TV off before Jamari could see the next segment. But he had already read it online. The stress began to show. Jamari's grades slipped for the first time in years. He barely slept. When teachers asked if he was okay, he just nodded. When friends texted, he left them on read. One evening, Tamika found him sitting outside on the porch steps, hoodie up, staring at the sky. "Baby," she said softly, sitting beside him. "You can talk to me." He shook his head. "I did everything right, Ma. Everything. And they still hate me." Tears burned in her eyes. "They hate what you remind them of."
What's that?
"That the truth doesn't go away just because they don't like it. But truth came with a price." By midweek, the Watsons began getting calls from blocked numbers. Some silent, others venomous. "Drop the lawsuit. You're ruining lives. Go back to where you belong." And the most chilling one, a low male voice that said, "You think you're untouchable, boy?" Tamika filed a police report. They promised to look into it. Nothing came of it. Mrs. Langston wasn't spared either. She received a letter on her hospital nightstand. No one knew how it got there. "You made this a race issue. You deserve what comes next." When she told the nurse, security increased one guard outside her room. But the message stayed in her mind, echoing long after the paper was gone. She began sleeping with the TV on, afraid of silence. And yet, as the threats mounted, something else was happening quietly beneath the chaos. People started pushing back. Students at neighboring schools organized peaceful rallies. Signs read, "Truth isn't treason." Local activists launched an online fundraiser for the Watsons' legal defense. Black churches opened their doors for community vigils, urging prayer and protection for Jamari and Mrs. Langston. At one rally, a local pastor's voice thundered through a megaphone. "They tried to turn our brother into a villain for doing right, but righteousness doesn't need permission." The crowd roared back. For the first time in weeks, Tamika smiled. Reporters began to notice the growing movement. The narrative started to shift again. National news outlets ran features titled, "When Truth Becomes Dangerous," and "The Teen Who Refused to Be Erased." But the district doubled down. Their legal team released new statements, hinting that Jamari's presence in the class was still under investigation. Translation: they were looking for a loophole. Malcolm Ray, the civil rights attorney who had been following the story from St. Louis, watched all of this unfold with grim familiarity. He'd seen this before, the system punishing people not for what they did, but for daring to speak. That evening he made a call to a mutual contact in Stonebridge. "Get me Mrs. Watson's number," he said, "and tell her not to talk to any more reporters until she talks to me." Back in the Watson home, the tension hung heavy. Tamika sat at the kitchen table surrounded by bills, printouts, half-empty coffee mugs. Her phone buzzed, a new voicemail from an unknown number. She pressed play. "You've made your point. Now shut up or suffer." She deleted it without flinching. Then she exhaled shakily, resting her face in her hands. Jamari walked in moments later, holding a paper from school. "I'm supposed to write an essay about moral courage," he said quietly. "They gave me the topic." Tamika looked up, half smiling through her exhaustion. "You already lived it." That night, while Jamari slept, Tamika's phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. But this time, it wasn't a threat. A calm, deliberate voice spoke. "Mrs. Watson, my name is Malcolm Ray. I'm a civil rights attorney in St. Louis. I've seen what's happening to your family. I'd like to help." She hesitated. "We've had a lot of people say that." "I'm not people," he replied. "I'm someone who's been where your son is. Someone who remembers what it's like to be silenced for being right." There was something in his tone, measured, steady, real. Tamika exhaled. "Come by tomorrow. And then a powerful ally reached out. A civil rights lawyer with a personal connection. A lawyer who'd once faced the same classroom injustice. Vowed to fight back. Malcolm Ray didn't catch the story on the news. It found him. He was halfway through reviewing deposition footage for another civil rights case in his modest law office in downtown St. Louis, when his paralegal slid her phone across the table and whispered, "You need to see this." It was a clip of Miss Langston's apology, the one that had already racked up over 1 million views. Malcolm watched it once, then again, then a third time in silence. He didn't blink when she said, "I saw defiance where there was dignity," but when the camera cut to a freeze frame of Jamari Watson performing CPR on a woman who had ignored him, his body calm, his hands precise, something cracked open in Malcolm's chest. It wasn't just compassion, it was memory. Years ago, Malcolm had watched his own younger brother, Darius, be dragged down by a different kind of silence. A quiet academic achiever, Darius had once been falsely accused of cheating on a chemistry exam because his answers were too perfect. The school called it a routine investigation. But by the time it was over, Darius had lost his recommendation letters, his confidence, and eventually, his college offer. No apologies, no redemption, just silence. Malcolm never forgot. And now, watching Jamari, he saw the same story, but this time there was still time to rewrite the ending. Within 24 hours, Malcolm had made contact. He called Tamika Watson directly. "I'm not here for publicity," he said. "I'm here because I know what happens to quiet black boys when institutions feel threatened." Tamika was wary. She had every right to be. "We've already had a dozen lawyers call. Some just want a case for TV." "I'm not some," Malcolm said. "I'm doing this because I lost someone. And I don't want your son to become another statistic." She agreed to meet. They sat around the Watsons' kitchen table that evening. Jamari mostly quiet. Tamika arms folded, protective. Malcolm explained his proposal. "There's a legitimate basis for a racial discrimination lawsuit against the district," he said, "and I'll take it pro bono." Tamika looked skeptical. What would it even do? Force the district to acknowledge what they did. Force a review of reassignment and reporting practices. Maybe set precedent. Maybe change something. Jamari finally spoke. "And what if it just makes them hate me more?" "They already wrote you off," Malcolm replied calmly. "You're not doing this to make them like you. You're doing it so they can't do this to the next kid." That sentence stuck. Malcolm began building the case immediately. He filed open record requests. He reached out to staff, students, anyone willing to speak anonymously. He found inconsistencies between Jamari's reassignment report and witness statements. He obtained surveillance footage showing the quiet cruelty of how Jamari was treated, subtle, coded, but unmistakable. He dug deeper. He discovered emails between teachers subtly flagging certain students using coded language, needs structure resistant to feedback, quietly oppositional. Jamari's name appeared twice. Malcolm felt his jaw clench. They'd never called him disruptive, but they'd treated him like a fuse waiting to blow. Then came the mobilization. Malcolm reached out to community leaders. Churches held forums. Civil rights groups lent their resources. Local black radio picked up the story and broadcast Jamari's side. Stonebridge silenced a hero, one caller said. "Now it's time we made some noise." And they did. Defend Jamari trended for 3 days straight. Celebrities began amplifying the lawsuit. But behind all the momentum, Malcolm kept his team focused. "This isn't about likes. This is about law," he reminded them. They weren't just trying to win. They were trying to change something. Then the school district retaliated. A press release hit inboxes and news feeds one Thursday morning. Stonebridge District responds to ongoing public allegations. The statement didn't mention Jamari by name, but it listed a student recently involved in a medical emergency event and outlined a documented history of behavioral challenges. Attached was a summary of disciplinary records. 3 tardies, 2 phone use violations, 1 note from freshman year, appeared disengaged during peer group activity. Malcolm's phone blew up. "They're smearing him," Tamika said, hands shaking. "They're trying to paint him into a stereotype." Malcolm replied, "But that just proves our point." The media ran with it. "Hero or habitual troublemaker," one headline read. Another, "Stonebridge student had prior issues," district says. Talk shows debated the gray area. Pundits questioned if the narrative had been too one-sided. The airwaves buzzed with coded language, urban, troubled, misunderstood. It was character assassination, death by 1,000 microaggressions. And it was calculated. Malcolm called an emergency press conference of his own. He brought copies of the entire file the district leaked. This is what they consider a pattern of behavior, he said, holding up a sheet of paper. 3 tardies. 2 times he used his phone. This is the mountain they're trying to bury him under. He let the silence hang. Let me be clear. If Jamari Watson were white, he'd be a student who marches to the beat of his own drum. But because he's black, he's suddenly a threat. Reporters scribbled furiously. Malcolm turned toward the cameras. And if Stonebridge thinks they can win this fight by dragging a teenage boy's minor infractions into the light, then they've just escalated the wrong battle. That night, Tamika found Jamari staring at the ceiling in his room. She sat beside him on the edge of the bed. "You okay?" she asked. He didn't answer at first. Then, I thought it'd feel good, telling the truth. Having people hear me. "It doesn't?" He turned to her. "Not if they don't believe it." Tamika ran her fingers over his hair. "Baby, people believe it, some just don't want to. And those are 2 different battles." Malcolm stayed late in his office that weekend, preparing for the next stage. He knew what was coming next. The school wasn't done. They were going to fight dirtier, and he would be ready. The school prepared for war by releasing Jamari's sealed discipline record. They couldn't disprove his actions, so they attacked his reputation. When the media dossier landed in the inboxes of reporters and bloggers alike, it looked official. A PDF titled Student Conduct File, Watson, Jamari, stamped with the district's crest. There were yellow highlights, red circles, and side notes. Everything laid out to suggest one narrative, that Jamari Watson wasn't the quiet honors student who saved a teacher's life, but someone with a pattern of trouble. The leaks began with the most mundane items. A tardy here, a phone visible in class there, a note from freshman year saying talkative during lecture needs redirection. On their face, minor, in the context of his heroism, weaponized. For Malcolm Ray, the attorney, these leaks weren't a setback, they were a confirmation. He had warned the Watsons this fight would get dirty. Now it had. The next morning, local headlines pulled his smallest infractions, as though they were proof of character. Hero or headache. Student with past infractions, saves teacher. Disruptive behavior. District points to Watson's file. Tamika sat at the kitchen table. The coffee cooled, the screen of her phone buzzing with alerts. She watched them roll in. Tweets tagging out of context items. Conversation threads where people asked, if he was so good, why did he have write-ups? Even at school, some staff subtly passed around printouts. Jamari was silent, his jaw set. He skimmed one article, folded the paper carefully, and laid it aside. "They're picking from the past, Ma," he said. "They're making me the problem." She nodded, the ache of helplessness covering her like a heavy shawl. Malcolm assembled the team. He asked for every record they could legally obtain. Write-ups, counselor notes, classroom incident logs. He brought in statisticians. He asked teachers to document all phone-in-class violations, tardies, even petty mischief, but then compared them to disciplinary actions taken across demographic lines. What he found was telling. White students typically got warnings for seating shifts. Black students were moved to alternative settings. A phone used in class led to a detention for one white student. The next day, a black student received a suspension for the same action. Jamari's infractions were clustered around deadlines and phone checks, but always checked, always flagged, always elevated. Malcolm's voice grew hard when he shared it. They didn't silence him because of what he did. They echo-chambered what they believed he was capable of. An unexpected twist arrived when one teacher, Ms. Delgado, resource teacher in freshman year, came forward under protection of anonymity. She revealed an email chain where a dean wrote, in shorthand, "We might need to move Watson, too quiet, doesn't engage. Potential distraction if left unchecked." That language, potential distraction, was coded, and now Malcolm held it. He presented it in a press meeting. "We have here in writing the mindset, assessment, not of behavior but of assumptions. The harassment of his reputation is not reaction. It's premeditated." Reporters leaned in. One asked, "Do you believe this is racial bias?" Malcolm didn't hesitate. "Yes, and we're going to prove it." But public opinion fractured. On one side, teachers, community activists, civil rights groups who saw the pattern. They tweeted, spoke, organized. They posted charts, shared stories, mobilized. On the other side, parents, alumni, local bloggers who said, "What about the rules? Where's the accountability when students misbehave?" Some wagged fingers at Jamari, citing the leaked file. See? It doesn't add up. Tamika scrolled through the comments one night, until fatigue washed over her. She showed Jamari. He read one comment: smile when you get caught with your phone in class, but act surprised when they call you a hero. He scrolled another: good kids don't need rescue, they stay in their lane. He shut the phone. You see it, ma? She nodded. I know. Meanwhile, the district's PR machine whirred quietly. They held briefings for selected media, distributed memos under embargo, leaked dossiers, sent consultants in to shift the conversation from heroism to compliance. They shifted the focus. Was the hero truly unexpected? Was he always a model student? Was the reassignment perhaps justified? In the lounge at Stonebridge High, whispers floated. One teacher said to another, I saw the file, there's something more than just tardies. Another replied, maybe. But if we don't keep discipline, what kind of school are we? And somewhere in that whispering, Jamari still walked through the corridor, invisible to most, coded as something else by a few. Late one evening, Malcolm called Tamika. I found something, he said. A hidden audio recording from the principal's office. Tamika's heart raced. What does it say? It's too early to reveal. But it changes everything. The line went quiet. Tamika looked at Jamari in the living room. He sat at the table, silent. She asked, You read? He didn't respond immediately. Then he nodded. I think it's time. That night, the leaked record leaked further. Old write-ups that had been dismissed. Counselor memos, marked monitoring required. A letter from freshman year that said, student appears disengaged but excellent potential. That last bit cut deeper than any suspension. Malcolm held a press conference the next afternoon. He displayed the audio clip transcription, but not yet the recordings. He said this is what a narrative looks like when you allow assumptions to speak louder than actions. Reporters asked questions. What's the twist? We'll show you tomorrow, Malcolm said. Public reactions grew volatile. Some students at Stonebridge High held signs for Jamari. Others stayed away. Some staff whispered about the poor kid caught in a storm. Others called him the kid who tried to steal media attention. Jamari sat in class one morning, his hoodie on, headphones tucked around his neck even though music wasn't playing. A teacher passed him a note. You did good. He folded it and slipped it into his notebook. He didn't smile. As the wind built around the case, two futures lay side by side, one where Jamari would be vindicated, one where the pressure would break him. Malcolm met him after school. Tomorrow morning I'll play you the recording in full. Jamari nodded. Malcolm's eyes were firm. They realized they couldn't disprove what you did, so they mischaracterized who you were. Jamari looked up. Good, let them try. The lawyer nodded. We're winning that fight. But this next one, this one's head on. They won't play nice. The landscape had shifted. They had attacked his reputation because they couldn't deny his courage. They had rewritten his past because they couldn't rewrite his act. And beneath it all, a recording waited. A final twist in the story they thought they controlled. But a hidden audio recording from the principal's office changed everything. When the mask slipped, the truth about the school's culture was undeniable. On a quiet Wednesday morning, the audio recording landed in Malcolm Ray's inbox like a detonator. He listened once, just once, before leaning back in his chair. Stunned. The voices weren't muffled. They were clear, sharp, casual. A meeting of the administration at Stonebridge High School. A closed-door faculty meeting. A teacher's lounge. Someone left a recorder behind. You watch that Watson kid. Quiet boy. Too quiet. I bet he ends up in the system. He's got that look. The kind that gives us headaches later on. If he pulls an unexpected move, don't blame me. I told you. Malcolm's fingers hovered over the transcript. Watch that Watson kid. He sat forward. This was beyond paperwork. This was culture. Meanwhile, at the Watson home, Tamika answered her door to find a plain manila envelope. She carried it inside to the kitchen table, opened it, and pulled out a USB drive. No note, no signature, just the drive. She looked up at Jamari, who sat cross-legged with his notebook on the couch. Your lawyer sent this? He asked quietly. No, she admitted. I don't know where it came from. He slid his hoodie off, pulled his phone into his lap, and nodded. Play it. The recording began with voices he'd heard. Those same voices. The whispers, the predictions, the dread disguised as harmless gossip. He looked at his mother, anger flashing in his eyes. They weren't talking to each other. They were talking about me. Tamika placed a hand over his, her voice low. And now you have proof. Across town at Stonebridge, word of the leak had already spread. The administration scrambled to identify the breach. Faculty meetings were canceled. Emails were encrypted. We're in a review period, Principal Stroud told staff. I'm not joking. But in the hallways, the mood changed. Teachers who once towered over students with ease now shifted nervously. The whispers between them were tighter, shorter, full of fear that someone had recorded them. Students sensed it. The eyes of teachers followed them more closely now, not in suspicion but in caution. Some staff emailed each other quietly. Have we been recorded? Others simply looked away when Jamari passed by. At a small local bookstore that evening, a spontaneous gathering formed. Students and community members convened after seeing a flyer. Audio leak listening and discussion. What Stonebridge isn't saying. Snow-flurried air pressed against the windows as a projector flickered on inside. Malcolm opened the meeting with the clip from that morning. The room was silent except for the hiss of the projector. When it stopped, he asked, "Does this shock you?" No hands rose. "Why not?" A young woman raised hers. "Because we heard it years ago." Another voice. "We just never had proof." And then an older pastor spoke. "You can't fix what people deny exists." Students pulled out phones, recording reactions. The images of the meeting would later circulate on social media. Hashtags buzzing. Stonebridge audio. Truth into hallways. Teachers in the rear rows shifted. Some left before it ended. And then came the school's response. 2 teachers, Mrs. Reed and Mr. Dillard, were placed on administrative leave. Not because of proven wrongdoing, the public statement said, but pending investigation due to the release of confidential school materials. Inside the lounge, the tension crackled like static. One teacher muttered, "We got caught talking." Another responded, "More like we got exposed." But students staged a walkout the next morning. At the main entrance of the school, 150 voices chanted, "Truth, accountability, respect." Signs volleyed in the cold air. We heard them. Culture matters. Unmask the system. Station cameras rolled. The district's public relations team scrambled. Word of the leak reached headquarters of the NAACP. A regional director called Malcolm. Directly. "We want in," she said. "We've seen what you're doing with the case. We didn't think we'd ever find audio like this in a high school." Malcolm exhaled. "It changes things." "Good," she replied. "Because we're bringing resources. Legal, media, organizing." At that moment, the fight became larger than Jamari's story. It became emblematic. Back at the Watson home, Jamari sat at the dining table with the transcript. He looked up at his mother and said, "They believed we wouldn't get this." Tamika nodded. They assumed silence. He leaned forward. But the silence gave them the cover. "We broke it." She placed a hand on his shoulder. "You broke it." But as everything built toward momentum, a twist came. In the midst of the walkout, principals found a note taped to Jamari's locker. Not graffiti. A typed sheet. "You think you're changing something. You're just making it worse for yourself." It wasn't the first threat they'd received, but it was the first time someone targeted him at school. With a printed warning, the principal immediately locked down part of the hallway. Security increased. Students handed out flyers with emergency hotline numbers. The walkout attendees gathered in a circle, silent for a moment. Then someone started a chant, "We stand, we speak, we won't break." Malcolm watched the footage from the protest the next day. He noted every face, every sign, every moment when Stonebridge's culture was voiced openly. Then he looked at the audio clip again, heard the laughter behind the whispers, heard the teachers speculating about students like Jamari before they even knew them, and he smiled grimly. The case wasn't just about discrimination, it was about silence, amplified. As evening fell, the school district sent an internal memo. "We regret the unauthorized release of confidential materials. We will conduct a full audit of our communication protocols." But the memo didn't mention bias, didn't mention apology, didn't mention the leak. And that bothered Malcolm. Because the recording had revealed something far deeper. A mindset, a culture, a readiness to write off a student before knowing his name. Jamari lay on his bed, tapping through the chants, the hashtags, the article headlines. Tamika sat beside him. "Are you ready?" she asked softly. He didn't answer. He just stared at the ceiling, the neon light from the screen of his phone reflecting off his eyes. After a moment he said, "I found the courage to speak, but I'm still scared of what happens after." She squeezed his hand. "We'll face it together." And at that moment, As the live feed changed from protest footage to late-night commentary, the chapter changed. Because the boy they'd called Trouble was now standing in front of history, and then Jamari took the stand, his voice shaking, but steady. He didn't want fame or revenge, just dignity. Jamari Watson didn't want to be in a courtroom. He wanted to be in chemistry class. He wanted to prep for the SATs, apply to Howard like he planned, maybe graduate early if his AP scores lined up. But instead, he stood in front of a courtroom, packed with reporters, attorneys, students, teachers, and strangers from all across Missouri. The air buzzed with anticipation, cameras just outside the doors, and the murmurs of a country on edge. He adjusted his tie 3 times before Malcolm Ray gently touched his shoulder and said, "You don't have to be perfect, just be true." Jamari nodded and walked to the witness stand. It had been a long trial. The lawsuit, filed on the basis of racial discrimination and defamation, was now in its final stretch. For weeks, the courtroom had heard testimony from school officials, teachers, students, and even medical professionals. Each side argued their version of the truth. The district clinging to policy, the Watsons fighting for justice. But nothing hit harder than what was about to come. This moment, the boy at the center of it all, finally speaking. Jamari sat down, took the oath, and adjusted the microphone. For a second, he didn't speak. His eyes scanned the room. He saw his mother, front row, gripping the edge of her seat. He saw Mrs. Langston beside her, face pale, but resolute. He saw Malcolm giving a slight nod, and then he began. "My name is Jamari Watson. I'm 17. I go to Stonebridge High School." His voice wavered slightly, but he didn't stop. "I didn't grow up wanting attention. I grew up wanting to make my mom proud." A beat of silence. "I got kicked out of Mr. Foley's class because I said something about justice. That was all. I didn't yell. I didn't curse. I said sometimes the law protects injustice." And he said I was being confrontational. He looked down for a second, then back up. "So they moved me to another class. Mrs. Langston's class. She didn't know me. I could tell she didn't want me there. She looked at me like I was already a problem." He paused again, this time longer. "But I didn't argue. I stayed quiet. I just tried to do my work. I tried to prove I wasn't who they thought I was." There was a tightness in the room now. People leaning forward, breaths held. Then she collapsed, in the middle of class, and I was scared. But I remembered what I learned at a youth camp, a CPR certification my mom made me get. His voice cracked slightly. "So I moved. While everyone else froze, I moved. I checked her pulse, started compressions, told people to call 911. I just wanted to help." He exhaled. And then his voice turned quiet. Almost too quiet. "And then, they said I wasn't supposed to be there." A ripple in the audience. "They didn't call me a hero. They said I was unassigned. A disruption. That I shouldn't have been in that room." Jamari's hands clenched on the stand. "I didn't ask for fame. I didn't ask to be in videos or on the news. I didn't even ask for this trial." A tear slid down his cheek, but he didn't wipe it. "I just wanted to learn." Someone in the gallery gasped quietly. Another person sniffled. Miss Langston covered her mouth with one hand. Tamika dabbed her eyes with a tissue, barely breathing. Jamari kept going. "They tried to say I was always a problem. They pulled up old stuff, tardies, notes, things that don't mean anything when all I ever did was try to be invisible and survive school." He looked at the jury. "I don't want revenge. I want dignity. I want to be able to walk into a classroom and not be seen as a threat." He paused one last time. "I want to be seen as a student, not a story." The room fell utterly silent when he finished. Even the judge looked moved, adjusting his robe with a long breath. Jamari stepped down slowly, returning to his seat beside Malcolm. The attorney whispered, "That was more powerful than anything I could have written." Jamari didn't respond. He just looked ahead. Next came closing arguments. The school's legal team tried to reframe everything as a miscommunication, a lapse in protocol, not racism. They referenced school policies, risk assessments, teacher discretion. They painted the district as overwhelmed, and Jamari as an unfortunate case of misunderstood behavior. Their tone was clinical, safe. Then Malcolm stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't point fingers. He simply walked to the jury and said, "You saw the footage. You heard the audio. You listened to that boy. The district didn't fail a protocol. They failed a person." He paused. They failed to see a child. They saw a stereotype instead. He walked back to his table, hands steady. That is not a policy issue. That is a moral one. By the end of the day, the national media had fully descended on Stonebridge. News vans lined the courthouse. Interviews with community leaders and legal analysts ran on cable. Social media flooded with the hashtag #LetChamari People weren't just watching, they were waiting. For something bigger than a verdict. They were waiting for acknowledgement. For justice. That night, Tamika and Jamari sat on the porch together. The wind was light. The stars unusually clear. "Whatever they decide," she said, "you already won." Jamari shook his head. "I don't feel like I won anything. You told your truth," she said. To their faces. "And you didn't flinch." He looked at her. "What if that's not enough?" Tamika didn't answer. She didn't have to. The next morning, the courtroom buzzed with electricity. A bailiff entered with an envelope. The jury had reached a verdict. People leaned in. Reporters pressed record. Jamari closed his eyes. And when the verdict came, it rewrote more than just school policy. He entered the classroom unwanted. He left it a national symbol of grace under injustice. The courtroom hall buzzed like a swarm of electric current the morning the verdict was read. Jamari Watson sat in the front row, flanked by his mother, Tamika Watson, and his attorney Malcolm Ray. Every eye in the room was fixed on the judge as he cleared his throat and unfolded the page. It felt like the final scene of a long film, one built on fear, prejudice, silence, and unexpected redemption. On the count of racial discrimination and retaliation against the student, the jury finds in favor of the plaintiff, the judge said. The words hung like sunlight in a dark room. A settlement was announced immediately afterward. Stonebridge High's district would pay not just a financial award to Jamari, though there was that, but far more dramatically, they created a scholarship fund in his name, ensuring future students from underserved backgrounds could attend college. They also committed to mandatory anti-bias training for all staff, publicly acknowledging that the system had failed a student, not just for one day but over years. Malcolm stood by Jamari after the reading. "You changed the whole structure," he said quietly. Jamari nodded, blinking against tears. "I didn't mean to," he murmured. "Meaning isn't as important as impact." Malcolm replied, "You made them act." Outside the courthouse, the scene spilled into the street. Reporters surrounded Jamari and his mother. Flashbulbs popped. Crowds gathered. One anchor asked, "Jamari, how do you feel?" He paused, then said, "I feel seen. That's all I ever wanted." Tamika squeezed his hand. And somewhere behind the noise, the community, black, white, brown, began to exhale. Back at Stonebridge, change began in quiet classrooms. Carol Langston, the teacher he helped save, returned from leave. But she didn't just return. She transformed. She began running racial awareness workshops with students, using her own experience as a teaching tool. She talked about bias, assumption, and redemption. She looked directly at faces she used to ignore. In the staff lounge, she said, "I had to be saved to wake up. My walls came down here so they could come down everywhere." Teachers listened. Some nodded. Others shifted uncomfortably. The training modules rolled out. The school's handbook was revised. The change didn't feel immediate. It felt overdue. At the varsity graduation ceremony, in the school's gymnasium, Jamari was named valedictorian. The gym flooded with applause when his name was announced. Every seat filled. Adults who once referred to him as that kid now stood and cheered. On stage, Jamari's voice steadied as he delivered his speech. "I didn't save anyone because I wanted recognition. I saved her because she needed it, and I needed to prove to myself that I mattered." Eyes filled with tears. Teachers wiped theirs. Students passed tissues. He ended, "To anyone who thinks you don't belong, you do. Even if they never told you, even if you weren't invited, you belong." And the room rose. Months later, the flyer arrived. Accepted Howard University, full scholarship. Tamika burst into tears. Jamari hugged her. "You did it, Ma," he said. "We did it." She laughed through sobs. "No, you did it." At Howard's orientation, Jamari walked among new peers and explorers. He carried his story quietly. No interviews, no news trucks, just a backpack, a class schedule, and humility he'd earned. One evening, 6 months after graduation, Jamari returned to Stonebridge High. The gym lights were bright. A banner hung, "Celebrate Change and Commitment." The room filled with students, teachers, parents, He approached the podium, the same gym where they once cheered for him as valedictorian. He looked over the faces, the ones who doubted him, the ones who cheered, the ones who walked out. The banner read, "Hope starts here." He took a breath. "Thank you," he began, "for seeing me when I wasn't supposed to be seen, for giving me the chance to be. I entered this gym as the kid nobody wanted. I leave it as someone who changed what this school stands for." The room stood, cheered, crying. Then he paused. "Imagine if I'd stayed silent that day," he said softly. The words pierced the air, like a challenge, because this was not just his victory, it was theirs. The students, the parents, the teachers, the system itself forced to reckon with its own reflection. Stonebridge High would never forget the image of a black teen kneeling to save a white teacher, and then kneeling again to raise a voice for a generation. And for Jamari, the final scene of his high school story didn't end with a diploma. It ended with a question. What if he'd stayed silent that day? Every eye in the gym turned inward. And for one shining moment, the answer felt impossible. What if he'd stayed silent that day? No child should have to prove their humanity just to be treated with basic respect. If this story made you pause, if it reminded you how deep injustice still runs, then don't scroll past. Type yes if you believe the truth should never be silenced. Subscribe if this broke your heart.